difficile che devo fare qua, ex.
Scusa, ESC, sì, sì. Sì,
Poi
sì.
devo chiudere velocemente e aprire all'altro. Voglio provare, no, in maniera tale
Secondo
che
me puoi anche lasciare qui e uno se lo clicca da solo.
vabbè, gentile.
E poi basta che vai nella modalità presentazione, no?
Sì, allora riapro questa.
No.
No.
Preferisci stare qua, Alma? Preferisci stare all'angolo perché ti devi alzare più spesso?
Forse sì. Ok. Perché così se parte il WebEx loro vedono già questo.
Sì, sì, sì.
Perché mi hanno detto che l'avrebbero fatto partire.
Qua e muoviamo e
Sì.
non c'è bisogno di guardare lo schermo perché noi vediamo.
Perché lo vediamo qua.
Perfetto.
Sì. Chi... Allora, il programma, Silvia.
Capire quando sta a me.
Elisa,
dopo
Carmela. Elisa, questo... no, scusami. Bisogna mandare su il... Silvia, il programma per noi lo tengo qui, perché se lo lascio qua magari qualcuno... Oppure qua sotto, vedi? Questo lo potete... Allora, quando parlo io, per favore, tenetemeli... Poi...
Mi metto io che faccio.
Sì. Io non parlerò molto, ma giusto per fare un'introduzione con i minuti. Ma tu riesci a vedere sul...
Io ho le cose
No, ma riesci a vedere anche il programma?
lo metto su.
Questa era ancora appena arrivata. Sembrava appena però arrivava stamattina.
Sì. Gregorio. Di Gregorio.
Vi ho scritto che cominciavano alle 11 con il WebEx, però vi ho mandato già 2 email.
Tieni presente che lui sta dormendo.
Speriamo che sia sono andata via.
Tu c'hai le email anche?
No, sto accendendo adesso.
Vabbè, non mi discosto. Stai di Gregorio, perché adesso?
Sì, quella di Gregorio. I break space sono andati via come il cane. Sì? Infatti non abbiamo più materiale per il banchetto di Ruggero. Ma sono quelli vecchi. Però e se sapevo ne avevo altri 3 o 4, cioè, però io non mi sono azzardata. Io da quando sono stati messi persone sopra. Sì, vabbè, costano i soldi, ci sono bellini, dove non c'è un contesto troppo tecnico, li uso. No, ma poi diciamo una cosa, lì quella roba era interpretabile, nel senso che volendo, diciamo, non era nemmeno sbagliata in una certa roba.
We went to sit under a tree. Some food. We had lots of food. Yeah. Yeah. The art present.
No, niente. Allora, per uscire di qua esco. Carmela? Carmela? Non so che cosa... cioè non riesco ad attivare né questo né questo. Devo correggere qua. Vedi, non mi segue. Non so se tu ti trovi meglio con questi. Non mi seguo con le mani troppo secche.
No, è che non sta proprio...
Quindi non funziona.
Perché è un disegno?
No.
C'è qualcosa che non va?
C'è qualcosa che non va. No. Ok.
Ok, adesso è andata. Aspetta,
è andata? Metti Silvia alla S alla fine. Non funziona. Ok. No, è che non va neanche indietro. Chiudi senza salvare, sì. Non sì. Ok.
Possiamo cominciare perché siamo già 5 minuti dopo.
Comincio. So I think that we can start. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for attending this side event, which is focusing on the Horizon 2020 Ecopotential project. It is a 4-year project which includes 47 partners and is analyzing 28 protected areas inside and outside Europe. On behalf of the coordinator, Antonello Provenzale, and the whole consortium team, we will discuss today about the achievements, the contribution of the Ecopotential achievements to GEO ECO initiative, as well as to SDG target. Ecopotential project includes a monitoring components, a modeling components, as well as is fostering the transition from the web of data to the web of knowledge, and is developing a community of practices. Carmela Marangi, who is the project coordinator, will provide you better details of our project. Within this session, we asked to all speakers to try to answer to the following questions. How can Ecopotential achievements contribute to understand the effects of climate change on ecosystem, define and monitor resilience indicator and essential variables, data cube exploitation by linking the past to future scenario modeling, and provide insights for nature-based solutions, as well as support sustainable development goals. This side event is organized in 2 parts. In the first part, you have here a list of the presentation. Then we will have 5 minutes of breaks in order to discuss and asking questions. And the second part, which will be led by Silvia Giamberini, will focus on the products from Ecopotential useful for GEO ECO initiative with perspective. And then, again, 10 minutes for discussion. So as I invite our project manager to give her presentation with details on the Ecopotential project.
Thanks a lot, Alma, for naming me coordinator, but the coordinator is this guy on the right. Is Antonello Provenzale, the coordinator of Ecopotential. Ecopotential is a large community. I thank you for coming on behalf of all those guys. It's a partial list taken from our internal communication tool. I'm the project manager of Ecopotential. And I have to explain you briefly what is about Ecopotential. The mission of Ecopotential is to make the best use of Earth observation to characterize the state and changes of ecosystems and ecosystem services to improve the management and conservation in protected area and beyond. Have you heard from Alma that we are 47? Actually, we are 48 this year. And regarding the protected areas we are working on, they are, well, the number is changing all the time. We started with 22, then we arrived to 25, and there are more protected areas joining. We are focusing our work on 4 ecosystem types: arid and semi-arid, mountain, marine, and coastal and transitional. These are our protected areas. As you can see, oops, it's moving too fast. As you can see, they are covering all the climatic regions of Europe, but we are also working on protected areas that are outside Europe in South Africa, La Palma, La Réunion, and also Caribbean, a large marine ecosystem. So, defining the goal of Ecopotential is difficult, more or less like defining essential variables, I think, but we'll focus only on main pillars and main steps of our road to the final goal, which is to improve the knowledge, to provide to protected area managers with tools and knowledge about ecosystem and ecosystem changes. We start with infill data, and we have objectives for each one of those pillars. We have objectives in infill data because we want to harmonize and mobilize existing data. On remote sensing data and products, we want to integrate infill data and satellite, and not only satellite, whatever remote sensing kind of data to produce variables and proxies, essential variables sometimes, to study our ecosystem and ecosystem services. Well, modeling, I will talk you later. Sharing is important for us, and then policy, which is a sort of final goal. Storyline is a way through, is a narrative that we co-design with scientists and protected area staff, and we use them as a narrative regarding all, collecting all the knowledge we have about an ecosystem or a protected area, and using them also in semantic networks and conceptual networks to extract also essential variables from them. Regarding data, going back to first pillar, we are not introducing new tools. We are using existing one, while performing DAMES as the air that is used to store quality assured context information regarding our protected areas, and we are populating this system with more than 1,000 long-term monitoring data. I don't know why it's going fast. And regarding remote sensing data and products, we are generating more than 300, following the requirements from the protected area staff. We are generating more than 300 products, and we are collecting them in a web map server, which is compliant with the Open Geospatial Consortium standards. We do also modeling, and I will explain later. And we integrate, there is something with animation beyond that. We share through the Ecopotential virtual lab all the knowledge we have, not only knowledge, also workflows, data, and whatever is useful for end users and decision makers to improve the conservation of nature in protected areas. The last part is the integration of nature conservation needs, sustainable development policy making. This image is taken is of the European Parliament, where we have been there on September with a joint initiative with IUCN and the European Intergroup of Climate and Sustainable Development and Biodiversity, and for a science policy briefing that was quite successful, encouraging for our direction. Thanks a lot. Sorry. Thanks a lot. This is just more or less a resume of what I've already said. And thank you.
Thank you, Carmela. And we have some problem with the WebEx connection, so sorry for disturbing you, but we need to set it because of one of the presentation. Now let me introduce Joan Mazot from CREAF for the next presentation.
Yeah, so thank you very much. It's very brief presentation on what is GEO ECO. And the first thing I would like to say is that GEO ECO is definitely inspired by the work of Ecopotential, but it is not Ecopotential. And I'm pleased to have a representation here of the US GS, that is part of the people that are or the institutions that are represented here in the leaflet. You can take the leaflet from outside that explains what it is. But you know, of course, USGS is just one of the many partners that we hope can be part of GEO. So please take one of these beautiful leaflets that have been prepared for the occasion. So the initiative, as I was trying to say, is about, of course, enabling Earth observation data, results, and products, and use them on a global scale for identifying protected areas of international relevance, and also extending the analysis to other areas that could not be protected yet, but could have some interesting interest for future protection. It adopts the view of the ecosystems as one physical system with the environment characterized by the strong relation between the geosphere, the biosphere, and the anthroposphere interactions across multiple spatial and temporal scales that control important fluxes of matter and energy that are sometimes studied in a thing that is called the Earth critical zone. So there are several examples here, and I would like to again emphasize on activities like this mapping global ecosystem for terrestrial, fresh water, and marine environments. So here in the leaflet says that the USGS is doing a global ecological land units, marine units, ecological coastal units, and ecological freshwater units. And this is one of the contributions that you see here. Since I am biased to the remote sensing, I selected this particular one in the presentation. Sorry for that, but you know that's That's life, that you tend to speak about what you know. And here you see a very, a very common image of a Landsat-derived normalized difference vegetation index. But again, this is only one of the activities. We also care about uncertainties. So, and this is the last one of the many things mentioned here. And you know, it talks about the uncertainties and the need for taking care on data quality and data quality propagation on the different models that are also mentioned. And these components are the components that all these institutions, and we hope many more, are going to be work on in this GEO initiative. If you remember, you know, there are flagships, there are community, there are foundational tasks, and there are initiatives in the work program, and this is one of them. So thanks for coming and for trying to understand what we are trying to do here in Ecopotential, and also adding new people in this initiative.
Thank you very much, Joan. And now, next presentation, I will provide this presentation. Do we have some news about the WebEx? Is it working now? Okay. Maybe in this room. But it is, okay. After my presentation, we will have a presentation through WebEx. For this reason, I'm trying to check if it is working. So, so this presentation will focus on the Earth observation system for ecosystem monitoring, which has been implemented within Ecopotential projects based on the achievement of a previous BioSOS projects. The main authors of the system is Richard Lucas from Aberystwyth University, and all the partners working within WUPI4 package. The schedule in this presentation, short presentation, I will provide you how changes are detected within this unified framework for linkover and change detection. To detect specific from to linkover classes transition, to identify when the changes occurred through time series analysis, where they occurred, and then how we combine different techniques in order to provide changes at multiple spatial and temporal scales. The Earth observation system for ecosystem monitor may use as input geophysical variables extracted directly from remote sensing data or from existing measurements and the previous thematic maps. It adopts as input knowledge, prior knowledge, in order to automatically provide new linkover maps, and can accept as input different multi-source satellite data at different grain, different spatial resolution. It adopts a Python open source and uses key files in order to provide outputs by comparing at different time T1 and T2 existing maps with the new maps. From linkover maps, habitat maps can be provided. It is very important to know that at the basis of this system, the hierarchical scheme of the FAO linkover classification system has been implemented. This is just a brief overview. It includes dichotomous phases where main link over categories are detected, and a modular hierarchical phase where after detecting 8 major linkover types, a set of predefined diagnostic criteria are used in order to include attributes for each classes. These are pure linkover classifiers, and we can add also environmental external attributes, which allows us to also translate linkover maps into habitat maps. So this is the schema where it is possible to detect with different LCCS code components changes in each components. So we can detect the changes in life form, changes in geophysical variables, and accumulate such evidence of changes in order to interpret changes as deforestation or regrowth, as in example already provided. This is an example of combination of long-time series analysis used to detect breakpoint and to identify through EODESM the different classes that changes from T1 and T1 and T2 around the breakpoint. And we use also EODESM in combination with the changes from Copernicus layers. So how EODESM can contribute to SDG1? It can contribute directly to the following indicators of SDG1 in red, or indirectly through measurements to the SDG 15 indicators reported in blue. And in addition, it can support informed decision-making, and it can provide better understanding of long-term ecosystem dynamics and flushes as useful input to nature-based solution implementation. Additional work is required to include also socioeconomic information, and very high-resolution data should be provided to complete the analysis. Thank you for your attention. You can see, you can read all the details about this system within WUPI 4 deliverables, which are public deliverables on our Ecopotential website. Thank you. And now we would like to try to make a connection with Antonio Di Gregorio, who will explain how the FAO LCCS2 will evolve in the LCML new version of the Linkover meta-language classifier. Let me try if it is possible to connect with him. Hello, Antonio, can you hear us? Excuse me. Okay, I think that we could skip this presentation at the end of the session if WebEx issues are solved. The internet connection is not working. Outside, but we are inside. Okay, thank you. Don't worry. Outside is very important. Okay, would you like to give some questions? Do you have some questions? No. So I think I propose to go on. Just because we can have more time later. So the next presentation is the one from Paolo Mazzetti. I'm sorry. Sorry, Letizia, because of this. Excuse me.
So, good morning, everybody. So I'm Letizia Navarro. I'm the Executive Secretary of GeoBond, and I was invited today to present what's GeoBond's approach to monitoring biodiversity change with the development of the essential biodiversity variables, or EBVs. But first, I wanted to put things a bit into context because I wasn't sure of how familiar you might be with GeoBond. So I'm going to start by explaining you what GeoBond is and what it is that we do. So GeoBond starts for the Group on Earth Observation Biodiversity Observation Network, and we're one of the 4 flagships of GEO. And our mission is to improve the acquisition, coordination, and delivery of biodiversity observations and related ecosystem services to a wide range of users, from the scientific community to decision and policy makers. And ultimately, our vision is to build a globally coordinated biodiversity observation network that can contribute to effective management policies for both biodiversity and ecosystem services. We're a global partnership, so we have partner organizations all over the globe, and there's actually more than the ones that I could fit on this slide. And we have a small secretariat that is hosted by the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, or IDIF, based in Leipzig, Germany. The activities of GeoBond are organized around 2 core focuses. The first one is the development of the essential biodiversity variables, which is what I'm going to focus on today. And the other one is the development of biodiversity observation networks. And both of these core focuses are meant to produce policy-relevant outputs. So the essential biodiversity variables. For those of you that are more familiar with them, they're largely inspired by the essential climate variables. And we define those EBVs as a minimum set of measurements that are complementary to one another and that can capture major dimensions of biodiversity change. So in other words, EBVs are biological and policy relevant. They have to be sensitive to change. They have to be biological state variables. To the best extent possible, they should be generalizable across realms, so marine, freshwater, and terrestrial. And of course, they have to be scalable and feasible. And we organize those essential biodiversity variables around 6 classes that cover all levels of organizations of biodiversity. So genetic composition, species population, species traits, community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem functions. And the development of those EBVs will rely on the acquisition, the mobilization, and the integration of biodiversity observations that were collected with many different approaches. For instance, remote sensing, environmental DNA, citizen science, field surveys, and so on. So concretely, oh, this is not working at all. It was not supposed to look like that. Well, those EBVs can be represented as data cubes. So, well, 2 dimensions will be space and time, and the 3rd dimension will describe biodiversity. So if I take the example, and again, this should look like a cube, of an EBV from the ecosystem structure EBV class, you would have, again, 2 dimensions, which are space and time, and the 3rd dimension would now be ecosystems, and you can imagine that each line would represent, for instance, an ecosystem type, and the value within those cubes would be 0, 1 if you're interested on the presence or absence of a certain ecosystem at a certain place and time, or it could be a value that would indicate the extent covered by this ecosystem within that location. So the way to populate that cube concretely at the ecosystem level is very often, of course, to use satellite remote sensing data, as is the case for the example that I'm showing here that is illustrating an EBV that would be forest extent. And I'm not implying that it's necessarily very easy to do, but it certainly gets trickier when you're considering essential biodiversity variables at the species level. And so now the third dimension represents the taxonomy. You can consider that each line, for instance, is a species. And so the value in the cell will inform us, again, presence, absence of a species at a certain location, or maybe on the size of the population of this species at this location. But the problem is you can see that there are white cells in my data cube, and this is because we are not monitoring every single location on the planet. So the way to produce then an EBV data product for species population, EBVs for instance, is going to be first to integrate in situ observations that were, again, acquired with very different approaches, and then run a biodiversity model, which very oftentimes, of course, makes use of remote sensing data as well. And so on this note, the GeoBond community has initiated a discussion last year on identifying which are the essential biodiversity variables that could be enabled by remote sensing. So they're called remote sensing enabled EBVs. And what I'm showing you here is a very preliminary list. It's still being discussed. But what you can see is that with the exception of genetic composition, all the EBV classes could be, remote sensing could be relevant to generate EBVs for all the classes, for instance, fragmentation, ecosystem extent, as I mentioned, but also phenology and taxonomic diversity. But why are those EBVs important? Well, one way to look at it is also to understand them as a level of integration between primary biodiversity observations on the left-hand side and indicators of biodiversity change. And those indicators are the ones that are, for instance, needed by users such as national governments, including for their reporting to the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, or for IPBES assessments. And indeed, very early on, there was an effort to map the different EBVs to the Aichi biodiversity targets of the CBD, and to assess to which extent those EBVs could inform on how to help to keep track on the achievements of those different Aichi biodiversity targets. And it was found that the EBVs were relevant indeed for 13 out of the 20 Aichi targets. But more concretely, for the past couple of years, GeoBond and partners have been developing a set of global biodiversity change indicators that integrate remote sensing and in situ data, are meant to be scalable, and are most specifically dedicated to 5 of those 20 targets. And those indicators have been endorsed by the Conference of the Parties of the CBD 2 years ago, and they are currently being used for the global assessment of IPBES. And we've also recently started the exercise of mapping the different EBVs and EBV classes to the Sustainable Development Goals. So aside from the usual suspects, which are SDG 14, life below water, and SDG 15, life on Earth, we've also identified potential contribution of the EBVs to track progress towards a couple of other SDGs, for instance, zero hunger and health. But this is all work in progress. For something more concrete, our marine network, the MBON, is currently developing a prototype for an indicator that would integrate satellite Earth observations with data from OBIS and local surveys. And with that, I'd like to thank you. And if I still have time, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thank you very much, Letizia. Do you have any questions for this part of the side event, for the presentation already given? We have some minutes. No, not yet. So I think that we can invite the next speaker, and also Silvia, who will lead the second part of this side event. Ah, okay. Sì,
Actually, now we are trying to see if we can set the connection with Antonio Di Gregorio from the FEO, which is actually now Nairobi in Africa. In the meanwhile, I introduce to you Matteo Santoro, which is also partner in Ecopotential, who will explain how the EODES system we work in the Ecopotential Virtual Laboratory, which is the comprehensive tool which at the end of the project will make available all the results and data and models in Ecopotential. Here.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Matteo Santoro from National Research Council. So I'm talking about the EODESM and how we use this in order to develop the virtual lab. So Alma already introduced a little bit the EODESM model. Here I try to summarize what it is. So the idea of EODESM was to address challenges related to the protected areas issues, and trying to do that utilizing and making the best possible exploitation of the available remote sensing data. And so the EODESM is a system for automatically classifying land cover and land cover changes over 2 different time periods. And besides that, it is able to detect which are the possible events which caused those changes. So the EODESM is able to consider as input biophysical variables which can be derived from a variety of different sources, from both remote sensing, drones, and so on. It can detect then the changes according to the LCCS classification, and it is applying an evidence-based approach in order to detect these changes. It is able to include also local to global layers. It can facilitate the comparison between 2 different time separated periods, and can be replicated both with in situ and mobile. It can be integrated with in situ data, and it is developing a mobile application in order to assess the validity of the generated inputs. So what's the data flow which is implemented by the EODESM model? The input are these environmental variables, biophysical variables, which are then utilized in order to obtain the LCCS classification for the first time period in the selected area of interest. Then there is the classification for the second time period, and based on these classifications, the changes in the LCCS classes are detected. So with this, it is possible to apply this evidence-based approach in order to detect which are the possible events which cause those changes. This is a list of the possible events which are considered by EODESM, and a screenshot of how the result is displayed to the user with a map and the list of events which were detected by the algorithm. The last developments of the model also implemented this mapping of the LCCS classification codes to the FAO codes and to the habitat codes. So, as an example here, we see the Doñana protected area in southern Spain, and we try to identify the changes in environmental variables for water in this landscape. So the inputs in this case come from two different sources. One is water hydro period calculated from Sentinel-2 data for two time periods, 2015-2016 and 2015-2017. And the second set of inputs are the water extent, which are coming from CubeSat imagery, the Planet Lab. This is an example of the combined outputs which are produced from the model, which is showing both the land classification and the changes which were detected. In particular, we have the LCCS classification for 2016 and the hydro period changes together with the water extent changes between the two time periods. Finally, something about this mobile application which is being developed in order to assess the validity of the outputs which were generated by the model. So the future outlook for this EODESM system is to, of course, enhance it and utilize it in this chain in order to better utilize it in conjunction with other processings for climate change and prediction of future landscapes. And of course, as Alma was saying, the possibility for the outputs of this model is to contribute significantly to the UN Sustainable Development Goal 15, which is listed here. So we used this model as, let's say, the primary driver in implementing the Ecopotential virtual laboratory, and I want to say thanks to Richard, who is the main developer of EODESM, because he was very, very helpful in order to test the development of this VLab. So what's the VLab? The VLab is a cloud platform which is in charge of connecting different both data systems and knowledge systems, where by knowledge we have long-term preservation archives, we have ontologies, we have workflows, and then we can utilize all of these in order to connect the processing infrastructure for running the model. And of course, the virtual laboratory is the point which connects the Ecopotential world to the GEOS platform, the GEOS world. Of course, there are a set of apps which can be developed and have been developed on top of this virtual laboratory, which publishes some APIs, which are application programming interfaces, which can be used, as I said, to develop applications. So how does it work to publish a model on VLab? The VLab is conceived in order to support multiple programming languages. So far we have successfully tested the porting of models which are based on Python, R, MATLAB, Fortran, NetLogo, etc. It is possible to reuse the existing code, so there is no need to change the algorithm or to change its coding for bringing it to VLab. And it is based on connecting to the source using the widely used source code sharing, such as GitHub and SVN and so on. So all the changes which are implemented and coded into the model are immediately available in Virtual Lab as well. We have tested during the project with several modelers. We have collected their feedbacks, so how difficult it is to port models on the VLab. Generally, feedbacks are positive. The main identified barrier so far is the use of the Docker technology by the modelers. So what we are trying to do is to work in order to provide some predefined Docker images which can be used and can facilitate this step for the modelers. there is a detailed documentation of how to bring, to port a model on VLab. It is available online at this link. So how does VLab meet the GEOS platform? Here we have a simplified diagram of what we have developed so far. On one side we have the VLab, on the other side we have the GEOS platform with the Geo Discovery and Access Broker and the GEOS portal. So VLab essentially provides contents in terms of workflows and added value products, so the outputs of these workflows, while the GEOS platform at the moment provides content in terms of data sets which can be used in order to run these workflows. So the connection happens via APIs, so VLab utilizes GEOS APIs in order to discover and ingest data sets into models, and the GEOS platform is utilizing VLab APIs in order to discover and run workflows. Okay, and together with the European Space Agency, we have set up an experimentation where a dedicated community portal for Ecopotential was developed, which utilizes the VLab APIs in order to browse the content of Ecopotential, from ecosystems to protected areas to storylines and so on, and then it discovers the existing workflows, and it is able to utilize GEOS datasets in order to ingest these datasets into the workflow and run these workflows. We are going to have demos of this community portal at the European Space Agency booth during the exhibition tomorrow and on Wednesday, and there is also a video for this demo online. Thank you for your attention.
Actually, I'm trying to connect with Antonio, and maybe we can make it, because this internet connection works, and I can see his screen. So what we can try to do is that he talks through my computer, and I show the slide from here, because I don't have the connection from this computer to this. So this is an attempt that we can do, if it is okay to you. And okay, you don't have the connection. Otherwise, do you know if from this computer the internet connection can work and wireless?
Yes, but
because I can try to connect this phone.
yes, because this computer doesn't have any application for the conference call. You know, WebEx or GEO.
This computer.
No. So you have to connect with your computers to talk with.
Okay. Do you think that, Carmela, you can connect your computer here to the...
I don't think so.
Okay, so we can try this way. If Antonio can talk through my computer, I show the slides, and we listen from my computer with the loudspeaker. Okay? So we can try this way. Then, okay. So which is the presentation of Antonio? Is this one? Lui is online now.
Okay.
Okay, I try and see if it works. Antonio? Hi. If you can hear us, we can try with my computer, and we manage the slides from the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, then First slide, please.
Okay. We are on the first slide, yeah.
As you maybe yes, maybe you don't know, but each ISO standard after 5 years needs a process of revision. So FAO is on land cover in 2012, and then in the last year has been the revision of this. The standard was reaffirmed as a standard, but in this context, is proposed stage 0 to evaluate the ability of attaching to this standing on land cover a standard on land use. Next slide, please.
Okay.
To give you an idea of the actual standard, the actual is called the land cover meta language, and is a tool to structure a knowledge domain consistency between the users. The idea of this standard is to assure a link, continuity between land cover with the old vegetation science and classification. The system provides a tool to classify any of top-down legends. He assures bridging with system for the integration and organization of land cover, and he supports also the assessment of the similarity between different type of legends. Next slide, please.
Yes, okay.
Here you can see that we have started the standard in a year of process into ISO. We arrived to the standard. It was a long process. It is a new way for ISO to accept a standard. In effect, it's a different type of respect to the different classification system because it's object-based. And this diagram that shows the whole relationship between the object, it is done so in effect, using SML, you don't have a predefined list of classes, but you have, I would say, unlimited possibility to combine different attributes to describe any type of land feature. This system is also coping with the advance of science in many sectors. An example in the next. So, in effect, when you use this standard, you can create an object database, and you can also query the database by object. Next slide, please. So, in effect, when you want to represent any type of land feature, you create a kind of to represent the feature. And of course, it's much more functional to represent the variety and the real world with a model rather than with a name and a text description. So in this case, you see the representation of a map different object of the land cover meta language. Please. Of course, to assist people on use this standard, as developed a lot of tools. Some are just training in the website and the document, but some are just software to apply the rules of the UML. This is called SCCS version 3. Then we have other type of software for the interpretation and for the query of the next slide, please. Now, how this is in relation presentation of ecosystem? Well, more and more we see this question as a Sentinel-2 and the whole series of Landsat TM. We realize that the end feature, what we think. We have interannual variability, we have technological activities, etc. Now, the question is, it is still logical to landscape just as a stable entity. One of the problems that represent an ecosystem or a landscape element into a database is spatialization. And of course, we always use for the spatialization forward. But if we use this approach, it is very rigid. The classes are very with the dynamic nature of an ecosystem or of a landscape. Approach of LCML. Could you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Because when you use the ISO standard, you will have a information that goes from composition, decomposition, and based. Hello? Okay. I lost for a moment the connection. You hear me?
We can hear you, but maybe it's better if you repeat the last slide.
Okay. You number 8.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
What I was saying is that using the land cover meta language, you can create a much more dynamic database. Go from a recomposition. Basically, the map producer capture the real world, composing the whole element of the meta language, but then the object into a database. It is a very dynamic that you can decompose and recompose according to the application. So you don't have a single legend, but you have many different type of legend. And this is fitting very well with the idea of the dynamic nature of an ecosystem. Next slide. What is missed now in this L is that we represent all, and we know from long is a close relationship between land cover and land use. actually this relationship between land cover and the actually we put some land use name into the land cover legend. You can see different type of legend. One it is the Anderson legend, and one is the Corinne. But in the age of the new sensor, we are facing a more dynamic representation. And we are also facing the more complex relationship between the different aspects of the land feature. So we must find a way to represent land cover and the land and done up to now. Next slide, please. For the next slide, could you use the slideshow, please? Now, when you go to the presentation of a forest as a sample, you can define a forest from the land cover point of view. And here you see already that the different perspective from different country or different institution look to the terms. Bottom, please, and then you see in the upper part of the screen how it's always been the evolution of the terms forest in terms of land use. The begin for timber management, and then in the last years start to be also for conservation, from climate mitigation, etc., etc. Push the button, please. So here you see how different organizations look to the terms forest. Now the question is then, could you push the button? It is really a forest because we have so many different aspects from which we can define a forest. Next. So, the idea that we are to propose as ISO standard is that there is a relationship between object, land events, and socioeconomic functions. So, if we are able to link these three elements, we can represent better the relationship between land cover and land use. And by the way, these three elements can be also in line with the advance of science on the use of remote sensing. The first one, when we talk about the land object, they simply exist. So we can use how we are looking to the imagery of to the remote sensing data, just searching for objects. So using the radiometric textual resolution logic. If to human, these are events that occur. So we have now with Sentinel-2 to looking for a variation, and we look to a space-time event logic. And if we combine these two with the field observation, we get also the socioeconomic function. On the base of this triadic relationship, next slide please, we have created a new model that incorporates the see in the left of your screen, where we use basically biophysical objects, adding a new model that use function and purposes. So this meta model will allow the characterization of the length from different point of view. A pure length cover aspect, a length attribute, a pure land use from a pure land use point of view, length cover characteristic, or a real functional relationship with the end use. The last one, it is the one that perhaps will be directly linked ecosystems. Last slide. In this slide, these are the results of the ballot for this of FAO that has come out 4 days ago. So as you see, 36 countries has voted yes for the creation of this new stage 0. And there are 12 countries on which are the most important countries in terms of land cover and land use. US, China, Germany, England, Canada, etc. That will send the participants to this stage 0. The first meeting of the stage 0 will be in China, in China, the 22nd of course, the list of the people of the country, it is still open. So if there is somebody there that is as a link, can join us on this new working item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you very much for this effort. The problem is here the Wi-Fi in the room. Thank you. I will try to synthesize, and if there are some questions, you can answer directly. Do you have direct questions now? No. Okay, thank you, Antonio. So just to provide a brief summary about the evolution of this FAO link cover classification system from version 2 to this version 3, which is named link cover meta language. We will have the possibility to express a link cover class not only through a legend but through an ontology, which explains the functional relationship between different elements of the class, and these elements can be defined by users. And through this relationship, it is possible to identify the land use by integrating socioeconomics elements. And how can we extract these link cover land use classes directly from remote sensing data? Through the analysis of phenological features and textural features from time series of satellite data. This is the future. This is why we are we tried to have this presentation directly from FAO. And the legend of a link cover land use classification system is important because, as you know, within Europe we are working for a new global link cover map, and the translation between different legends such as Corinne, Eagle, FAO can be carried out within this framework. Thank you for your patience. So now, next presentation, Roger. Interviene.
Roger is one of the major, maybe the major contributor up to now to the GEO ECO initiative with a long work on ecosystem mapping. And he's not a partner in Ecopotential, but he's like as if he was. So please, Roger.
Good morning. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Palma, Carmela, all the organizers. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. Really, what I'm going to talk about is a lot of work that was actually the precursor to the Ecopotential part of GEO ECO. And I'm going to just run through some global ecosystem mapping efforts that are all done under the name of GEO ECO. Before there was a GeoBon logo, I made my own, and the GEO ECO. That just shows you how old this stuff is. It's before either GeoBon or GEO ECO had their own logos. But I include GeoBon here because although the work was derived from a GEO ECO task, a lot of the community and the users were interested in this in GeoBon, so it's sort of been cross-listed with GeoBon from the beginning. Why are ecosystems important? They give us everything we need as human beings, which we call ecosystem goods and services. And here's the short version of the long story of GEO ECO. The framers in the beginning, the framers of GEO ECO recognized this, that ecosystems are important. And so they set out a biodiversity societal benefit area, and they set out an ecosystem societal benefit area. So they created the theme as an area of study under GEO, and they didn't know what to put in it. And so they sent me an email. I got an email one day that said, Roger, we have GEO ECO societal benefit area. What should we do? You know, what sort of activities would be consistent with that? And I wrote back and said, well, I think you should do this global ecosystem mapping. And I said that because I had done some continental mapping in South America and for the US. And so I wrote him back and I said, oh, we should be doing this standardized global ecosystem mapping. And then shortly thereafter, I got this email that said, congratulations, you're the task lead for GEO ECO. Please convince USGS to let you do this as a part of your job. And I did manage to convince them to do that. And I was thrilled because I love ecosystem mapping. And so I was the original task lead for GEO ECO. However, I was pretty bad at it because I had these blinders on about the importance of global ecosystem mapping. And so that's what I was doing. But there's a lot of stuff going on in the domain of ecosystems. That's when Ecopotential came along. That's when Antonello came along. And he sort of stepped up to become the overall task lead of GEO ECO. And then I was demoted to a component lead. And so the global ecosystem mapping work stayed as a major part of GEO ECO. And then I was the leader of that, component one. There it is. Develop a standardized, robust, and practical ecosystem classification and map for terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems. We're the responsible member. USGS is the responsible entity. And I do a lot of this work with a great group of people over at Esri. And the GEO ECO global ecosystem mapping approach is right here. It's essentially a planetary stratification. We consider ecosystems at any point as the vertical integration of these structural elements, the climate regime, the organisms, the geomorphology. And then we map these different ecosystem elements out over space. And then we vertically integrate those and we produce these standardized maps. And so that's a map of global ecological land units, we call that. This approach is really scientifically a stratification and then a combination, and then you get so many classes you have to aggregate them up. So we mapped the climates and the landforms and the lithology and the land cover, and we combined all those, and we got, in the end, in terms of the maximum possible combinations of all these 4 inputs, we got 107,000 what we call ecological facets. Those are too numerous to be useful, except scientists love that kind of thing. But we were asked to aggregate those, and so we aggregated those up into 36, 39 ecological land units. It's a really nice global product. We published this. There's a GEO bond, GEO ECO logo right there. Again, these were the 4 inputs, and we produced this first booklet with the help of AAG, the American Association of Geographers. And here's sort of what they look like. It's beautiful cartography, really. What's amazing about this is those look like satellite images. We're all used to seeing satellite images, but those are actually modeled from data. So that's a data picture of the ecosystems of the Earth. And then working with Esri and realizing that you can't just make data, and you have to put this out as a variety of products. And so our kind of internal project tagline is data maps and killer apps. So we're trying to not just produce good scientific data, but also put it out in formats that are accessible to many different audiences. So we have a whole number of story maps and scientific browsers that go along that tell the story of the data. One of those is we took the global ecological land units and we extracted out just the mountain classes. And we have a new global mountains product, and we built this tool called the Global Mountain Explorer. And it's an example of one of these apps that are just a window into the data that anybody with an internet connection can use. And then if you like the data, you can go and get the data because we put it all out there in the public domain. If you want to know more about this particular application, please come to the GeoGnome side event. That's the Geo Mountains initiative. That will be later today at 3:30. Thanks, Elisa. Enough with terrestrial. We turned our attention to marine ecosystems, and we developed this set of global standardized ecological marine units. This is one of those first of their kind efforts because it was really true 3D. It's globally comprehensive, true 3D, and it's derived from data. And this is the data. It's NOAA's World Ocean Atlas data, which is a 57-year archive of data. We took 56 million points out of that record, which were the long-term averages of temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and 3 nutrients. And we did this massive 3D k-means clustering on all those data to create these long-term marine volumetric regions. That's what these EMUs are, physically and chemically distinct volumetric regions. And here's what they look like. Because it's 3D, you can go to any depth in the ocean and take a 2D slice, and you can see what those EMUs look like. We've symbolized them here with colors that represent the temperature. And so the pinks and the reds are warm, and the dark blues are cold. And so that's the surface at 0, the 200-meter depth, and then down all the way. And then you notice that there are smaller, warmer, more numerous EMUs near the surface. And then as you get deeper, the numbers decrease. And then down here at the bottom, there's only 3 ecological marine units around the entire ocean in the deeps. So those are the EMUs. And then because it's 3D data now, in order for people to actually understand it, you have to give them some visualization methods. And so the data are a 2D continuous surface at all depths. And so if you actually represent it as cylinders by cutting away the space in between the data points, then people can actually see from the surface down to the bottom. So every band on a cylinder is a distinct EMU. And here they are. They're warmer and thinner here near the coast. This is Southern California, Los Angeles, Central Valley. This is the ELU data, by the way. So this is how we visualize this massive global EMU data in 3D with these columns. Again, all this work is commissioned by GEO ECO. We built this EMU Explorer. It's kind of this notion of pick a point, anywhere, and then you get all the information about the EMU at that point. But then we have this vertical profiler as well, so that is whatever that variable is, and I can't even see it. It might be temperature, salinity, DO. That's the variable at the surface. And then this is the profile all the way down to the bottom of the ocean. Again, this is first of its kind data. You couldn't do this previously. We published this in Oceanography. We made another one of these AAG produced booklets. There we have GEO ECO, GeoBond logo again. So GEO ECO and GeoBond should be claiming this stuff as success because we did it with the charge. And so that means we have done ELUs and EMUs, but if you remember the commission was terrestrial freshwater marine environments. And so although we did this open ocean EMUs, those really don't do justice at the coastline because coastal ecosystems are smaller, finer spatial resolution, often linear, very densely populated by humans. So we decided we're going to do coastal ecosystems separately. That work is underway at present. And then we'll do global freshwater units, and we'll also do global ecological benthic units. We just had, this is October 1st, this paper just came out. This is now to do the ECU work, ecological coastal unit. We had to start with a coastline. Turns out there are some coastlines, a couple of them are proprietary and cost prohibitive, and we couldn't put it back out in the public domain. So we couldn't use those. And what is in the public domain is old and not as accurate. So we realized we're going to have to create our own new global shoreline vector. And we finished that, and we just put this paper out about that vector. And because it's a global shoreline vector, well then, if you apply polygon topology to it, it means that you have a new global islands data set. And so we're sitting on a new global islands resource, which is at a 30-meter spatial resolution. So that's a really nice contribution. This is the global shoreline vector, 30 meters. We went up into Google Earth Engine. We used 2014 Landsat imagery. We extracted it out of the cloud, brought it down. So then we had the vector. We had to clean it up and then apply polygon topology because every terrestrial landmass is an island. Some are pretty big, the continental mainlands. And so here's the result of that. We actually did the island creation, and we have 3 size classes, continental mainlands, and there were 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we arbitrarily separated those at those 2 canals. Why not? And then we had what we call the big islands, and that is any island over 1 square kilometer. So some of those are pretty small, but we called those big islands. And those are what you see here in blue. And then we had everything else that was less than 1 square kilometer. And those you see here as red, and you couldn't actually see them at this resolution, so we had to do some exaggeration so you could see all the little islands. That's how they hug the coastline. The red is ours, and the yellow is the previous global self-organizing, the GSHHS, I can never remember exactly what it stands for, but that was the previous vector in the public domain. That's a really nice resource. There are 5 continental mainlands. There are some 22,000 big islands, and there are 340,000 small islands. And we mapped them all, and we've named an awful lot of them. And we're going to talk about this in another side event, too. This is like the Global Mountain Explorer. We made a new web visualization and query tool called the Global Island Explorer. And there will be a side event tomorrow, the Earth EO for EA, Earth Observation for Ecosystem Accounting. And I'm going to show that Global Island Explorer more because we're launching it here. And we're going to launch that in the EO for EA side event. So I encourage you to show up for that. That'll be a great side event. And then coming attraction, we have to do global ecological freshwater units. These are ecologically classified rivers. So we're 1/3 of the way there. But our freshwater ecosystems will include rivers, lakes and ponds, and wetlands. So we have a lot more work to do until we're finished with the EFUs, but we're going pretty quickly. And finally, this is my last slide. Sylvia said, make sure, Roger, you tell people what they can use these ecosystem data and maps for. There's a whole variety of applications. In my heart of hearts, I'm a biodiversity conservationist. And so I'm coming at this, I'm mapping ecosystems because we need to know what they are, where they are, what condition they're in, and how we can best conserve them. And there's a policy driver for this, which we all know about, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And for each one of them, freshwater, terrestrial, and marine, they explicitly call for conservation of these ecosystems. And so I would say we have to map them, we have to know them before we can think about conserving them. So that's the conservation application. But of course, if you're interested in climate change impacts to ecosystems, you would want a good ecosystem resource. And then recently, and this is very exciting, the entire ecosystem accounting community is interested in these because this is ecosystem extent. And if you need to know ecosystem extent to do ecosystem accounting, then you've got to start with good maps of ecosystem occurrences. And as ecosystem extent, this is pure EBV stuff too that Letitia was talking about earlier. There's an entire class of EBVs called ecosystem structure, and one of those sub-elements is ecosystem extent. This is straight up ecosystem extent. So that's our job, is to map global ecosystems across all the domains. We're about halfway there. We're thrilled that GEO has commissioned this work in the first place because that's what we love to do anyway. And now we have the GEO charge to work under. We have the SDG charge to satisfy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. If there is time in the discussion later, Roger, you know that I want to ask you more about step further, how to implement more data and more information in these maps, and how to, and also how to update maps. We had this conversation by email, maybe using the potentiality of a global network for maybe a collaborative mapping in the future. So later, maybe we can, if there is time, we can elaborate about this. Now, a step forward in the Ecopotential workflow from data and mapping and land use to models that use this information to model ecosystems. And Carmela will explain shortly the work done in Ecopotential for modeling ecosystems.
Well, I will try to go fast with the modeling session. Modeling in Ecopotential is really heterogeneous. It's heterogeneous because we are mainly focusing our attention on protected areas, and often the problems do cross the borders of protected areas. So we work in protected areas and beyond with our modeling task. And we are modeling for the scientific, for ourselves, for the scientific community, but also to solve management problems in conservation, in the conservation duties of the protected area managers. And our modeling wants also to inform the policies at different levels. What we are studying with our models, we are studying ecosystems, ecosystem services, changes, and we go across scale with respect to the space and also with respect to the time. And the way we have not a unique approach to modeling, because we are using correlative models, we are using process-based models, agent-based models, conceptual models, Bayesian network, a full variety, because we are solving really different problems. We care about scale, and we work, even if the title was about regional modeling, our models goes from local, regional to global scale. An interesting aspect is the transferability. Some of our models are really problem specific, and so they have a low transferability, but and for several models we can reach high transferability in space and also with respect to the specific problem. Openness is the third important aspect of our work, because we would like to make all, not only knowledge, not only data available, but also workflows, and we do that in the Ecopotential virtual lab already described. And you will see this logo whenever we have a model that has been implemented in its stable version in the virtual lab. You will see that logo. So I will go fast through these models, and I will start with a typical model, well, a typical approach, and the typical problem is to study species distribution if you are dealing with biodiversity and ecosystem and nature conservation. Species distribution models, mainly correlative approaches, are central to our studies, and this is an example of application to a species in a mountain ecosystem. This tool has been implemented also in the virtual lab, and they are modeling, and the UFZ is modeling the habitat suitability for a species that is included in the European Habitat Directive, using incorporating a number of remote sensing derived data and products. Again, on species distribution models is exploiting satellite-derived ecosystem functional attributes. In BEO has studied the predicted ability of those functional attributes. Are not named here, but an example is enhanced vegetation index, for example, or land surface temperature, and those attributes proved to be able to increase the predictive ability in modeling the habitat suitability of different species, also at different spatial extent and a different spatial resolution. Even if it is not really a cross-scale approach, the authors of this study are capable at least for two species to show that is very robust. Using those attributes gives results that are really robust in a statistical sense. I'm sorry for going so fast on technical slides. Another local problem might be the control of invasive species. And this is an application in the Alta Morgia National Park in the south of Italy, a study site of Ecopotential. And the interesting interesting aspect of this approach is that the map of presence that is used here is derived from multi-temporal, very high resolution analysis, combining in-field data and remote sensing and very high resolution images to generate the initial presence map. And the initial presence map is feds into a process-based model. That the aim of this model is to find the optimal spatial temporal effort allocation in a program for the eradication of particular invasive species, Ailanthus altissima. Regarding transferability, this is a model that is transferable since it is a process-based model. It's quite easily transferable, just setting differently the parameters of the model. This tool is also available in the virtual lab. This nice drawing is another example of not an invasive species. In this case is a diagram synthesizing the knowledge that we have about pine processionary moth. And this infection is really a big problem for the Sierra Nevada study site, the Ecopotential study site. This work has been done by the University of Granada. In this diagram, we synthesize the process, and the process has been replicated in a model that is an agent-based model. And the first results of these models is we have been obtaining results with this model incorporating phenology, spatial distribution, and the effect of extreme temperatures in order to make a scenario analysis to improve also the capability and to support the decision making for the managers of the areas. This tool is available on the virtual lab. But we go, those models were looking at the local, at the regional problem. Instead, we have also global studies like this one performed by the University of Potsdam together with University I don't pronounce the name, Osnabrück. Yes, and they are modeling the relationship of the chlorophyll A with the nutrient and temperature. With an ensemble of statistical models, both linear and nonlinear. They managed to find that we might expect that the nonlinear statistical methods are better, best performing models, and that incidentally that total phosphorus has the largest explanatory power in this case. This is a global study because they have been collecting data and analyzing data for more than 57 European lakes, focusing on a number of pre-alpine lakes, again on mountains. Another global study is this one. This is a policy-relevant study. And the university, the same actors, they have been studying the effects of climatic and socio-economic indicators on land cover changes. And the policy, the question, policy relevant question they are answering is if the existence of protected areas can mitigate the effect of the impact of these climatic and socio-economic indicators. And as usual, it's a statistically sound approach that has been applied for gross domestic production change and population density and so on. Global, not only in space, but we go also, we make future projection. In this case, this study have been simulated looking at the last diagram. This is the projection of a chamois population in the Gran Paradiso National Park that has been generated according to 5 climate models. moreover, we have also the dynamic Bayesian network approach to ingest that links to climate scenario to understand, to study the ecosystem service, in this case the production, the primary production of blue mussels in the Wadden Sea, done by Deltares, our partner. And we are also developing tools for doing that, tools for spatial Bayesian networks that have been used to extract from the storyline the knowledge to be implemented, to understand, and to model ecosystem services in different protected areas. Last, modeling can be used also to generate serious games. This is an example of a serious game built by Deltares, and in this serious game, modeling, remote sensing data, expert knowledge, and other kind of data have been integrated. Integration is a relevant keyword for our project, and these serious games has the advantage of highlighting the uncertainty in policy and mitigation measures, and allows also to understand, to explore the trade-offs in optimizing ecosystem services for a specific goal. And that's it. Whew. Yes. Elisa, one of our pillar, generating tons of climatic data and scenarios to allow us to perform our scenario analysis and our future projection. Please, let's go up.
Yes, however, this is on a different topic. This is a short talk on how to get a large-scale view of snow depth in the Alpine region. And this short talk is intended as an introductory talk to the one which will follow by Gregory Giuliani, who will go more into the details of snow cover and snow depth in the Alps. So, if you want to get the specific aims of this talk are to review the available snow depth datasets in the Alpine region, to assess the uncertainties of these different datasets for both current and future conditions, and to illustrate some of the mechanisms which drive, in fact, the snow cover changes and snow depth changes in the Alps. Of course, this reflects in the outline of this talk. So how to get a large-scale view of snow depth? If you do not have in situ measurements of snow depth, which is often the case, this is true also for precipitation, you can rely on gridded data sets, such as, for example, satellite data or reanalysis data, which use data simulation techniques to keep the output of a numerical model as close as possible to observations. We can refer to satellite and reanalysis data in this example I will give as a reference data sets, and we want to evaluate these data sets by comparing them to each other. Then we have models, both regional and global models, which can be evaluated also in a historical period by comparison against the reference data sets, and in order also to make future projections of snow depth changes. So we want to evaluate, first of all, the reference data sets, because snow depth is one of the variables which are very difficult to measure, like precipitation, so we do not really have a ground truth for these variables. And this can be a problem when you want to, for example, validate the models, because you do not have nothing against which to compare or evaluate your models. So this is just an example. These are 4 reference data sets for snow depth or snow water equivalent, which are similar variables from 1 remote sensing product and 3 reanalysis. So we keep, for example, the remote sensing product as a reference, and we compare the reanalysis against the remote sensing product by calculating the anomalies. And I can go into the details, but this is to show that different data sets, in fact, provide quite different pictures of the snow water equivalent spatial patterns. And in situations like this one, we do not know exactly what data set we can keep as a real reference, a real ground truth. So one possible approach is to average the data sets you have and just take their mean as a reference against which to compare, for example, models. So this is exactly what we did in this study. This is, for example, the annual cycle of snow water equivalent in the Alps for the period averaged over the period 1980-2005. The colored line are the 4 reference data sets, and the gray line is their average. And we can, for example, use this metric to compare models. So in the right part of the plot, you have a lot of models, both global models, the gray lines, and the thick black line is their average, and regional climate models, the different colored lines. Please note that the vertical axis is different. On the left, you still have our reference data sets. So the message here is that there is a large spread among the different reference data sets, and there is a large spread also between the different models, of course. These have to be kept in mind when using models to make projections, of course. So you have to consider that the models have a large spread, there is uncertainty, but there is an uncertainty in this case also in the reference data sets. So probably the best thing is to use all the data you have and keep the whole ensemble, both in observations and in the models. So keeping in mind this, we can try to make projections of the future snow depth changes. In the left part, you have the clear decrease projected for snow water equivalents in the mid-21st century, from 2040 up to 2065, with respect to a reference period, 1990-2005, for the global models, the gray rectangles, and for the different regional models, the colored symbols. So the global models project a greater decrease in snow depth with respect to the regional models. And a reduction up to 80% in April is projected for the Alpine region. What can be the causes of this strong reduction? Of course, warming. But, and in fact, if you want to analyze this kind of things, you have to look also at the drivers of such changes. So, for example, look at the temperature and precipitation spatial patterns and changes in the models in particular. But one specific project I want to just introduce you is elevation-dependent warming, which is the mechanism by which warming rates are amplified with the elevation. And this is one cause of the strong reduction of snow, of course, in mountain regions, connected also to the upward displacement of the 0-degree isotherm. So elevation-dependent warming is a phenomenon which has been observed and simulated a lot in every mountain region of the world, and according to which snow reduction is at the same time a consequence of warming and the cause of warming because of the snow albedo feedback. So as snow, when snow decreases, of course, we have more absorption of solar radiation, which cause amplified warming, and which causes in turn further snow reduction, and so on and so forth. So these are well-known positive feedback loops. There are other causes of elevation-dependent warming, which I can't explain in detail, involving water vapor modulation of long-wave heating, the presence of absorbing aerosols, cloud cover, and so on and so forth. And models, of course, are one of the best tools to study this kind of phenomenon, because the models have all variables incorporated, which can be used to create and study the relationships between them. I don't go into the details of such study. This is just one model study looking at elevation-dependent warming in the Alps, with one single model run at different horizontal resolutions, because when you look at such processes which are highly dependent on the elevation, of course, the resolution may matter a lot. And this is a quite strong result just published because in the Greater Alpine region, because different resolutions of the same model show elevation-dependent warming. So the slope of that lines these are regressions between warming and the elevation are all positive, denoting elevation-dependent warming. And the mechanisms here are found to be related to the snow albedo feedback, the increase of long-wave radiation from the atmosphere to the ground, and the presence of increased water vapor concentration. So this is just one example, and I can give you more details on the science which is behind and providing the references. But just to conclude and leave the floor to Gregory, I would like just to summarize by saying that there is a large spread among the different grid data sets that you can use to have a more regional perspective on snow water equivalent in mountain regions such as the Alpine region. And there is a large spread in model evaluations too. These are two things to keep in mind when you want to make validations of model and, of course, projections of future evolution of the climate system and of snow cover in snow depth in this case in particular. It is important to correctly estimate the drivers of snowpack variation, so the changes in temperature and precipitation and their dependence on the elevation. For sure, what we need is to have more and more observations, especially up to the highest peaks, because there is a lack, of course, of measurement at the highest elevations. So even elevation-dependent warming, for example, can't be monitored as we should. And the models have to be refined more and more by increasing their spatial resolution and by improving their parameterizations, also improving their and refining their land surface schemes, which is important for a correct representation of snow processes. And the very last remark is that improving the open availability and exchange of in situ data and developing gridded snow data set at very high resolution are a priority for better studying and understanding the cryosphere and hydrological processes in our mountains. So this is the final message I'd like to leave to you. And maybe I can just leave the floor to Gregory, which will give a talk going more into the details of this high resolution needed to better capture snow variations.
No, ce l'ho qua. E tu sai come si fa a vedere la chiavetta? Perché non la vedo. This PC? No, ok, questo qui l'ho scaricato adesso. Sì, perfetto. Just a second, because Gregory just arrived and I'm uploading his presentation. Okay. So Gregory will show a practical way to use data cubes for the analysis of snow cover and NDVI in Gran Paradiso National Park, still another product in Ecopotential. What is this? This one. Okay.
Okay, grazie. So good morning, everyone. My name is Gregory Giuliani. I'm working at the University of Geneva in Switzerland, where I'm a lecturer in Earth observation, and I'm sharing my position also with UN Environment, the Global Resource Information Database, where I'm the head of the Digital Earth Unit, and I'm leading for Switzerland the Swiss Data Cube project. And recently we've been approached in the frame of the Ecopotential project by our colleague from CNR to work on snow cover mapping, because we've developed in Switzerland an algorithm to identify snow and snow extent over the entire country. And I will show you the first result coming out from this study on the Gran Paradiso National Park. So as you are all aware, probably the Landsat data is free and open for about 10 years now, and there is an increasing demand on Earth observation data. So you can see the number of download of MODIS data, of Landsat data, and now you can see also an explosion in terms of use of the Sentinel-1 and 2 data from the European Space Agency. So basically everything is in place, And we can ask ourselves, why doesn't the world use satellite data to a widest extent? Because there are several reasons. The first one is that it requires scientific knowledge to understand what data you need to use. Optical, radar, it's often still difficult to access and use and download. It's hard to prepare, so you have to, once you have the raw data, then you have to do some atmospheric correction, reproject the data, align the pixels. In case of radar imagery, maybe you have to do some speckle filtering. And then you need new capacities and training. So and now the good news is that there is a new solution that it's called data cubes. So it's a new concept that emerged a few years ago, pushed by Geoscience Australia and CSIRO. So they did the demonstration in Australia. And now, thanks to CEOS, so the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, the data cubes technology is spreading around the world. And Switzerland was the second country in the world to get a national data cube and the first one in Europe. So the data cubes, it's a kind of time series, multidimensional. It's not only in space and time, but also in data type. So if you ingest in your data cube optical and radar data, and it's a stack of spatially aligned pixels for efficient and effective access and analysis. So without data cubes, so that's the traditional way to do remote sensing, I would say a business unit, an individual business unit has to invest in the entire value chain. So download the data, pre-process the data, prepare the data, and then maybe start working, analyzing the data. So long and boring tasks to do a lot. With the data cube, so you can share the infrastructure and you can serve the various needs of various people. So basically what you store inside the data cube is what we call analysis ready data. So all the pre-processing has been done, all the data has been downloaded, and then you can start working with the data more efficiently. So all the business units still deliver impact individually, but they are sharing the infrastructure. So the key for working within a data cube environment is to use what we call analysis ready data. It's key to reduce the burden on EO data users, so you spend more time in doing analysis than searching and pre-processing data. So in terms of optical imagery, the ARD level is surface reflectance, so meaning that we convert raw data in radiance, then on top of the atmosphere reflectance, then in surface reflectance. And this is what we store in a data cube. So just to give you an example, in Switzerland, we have 34 years of Landsat and Sentinel-2 measurements stored in the data cube. So we resample all the Landsat data at 10-meter resolution so that we can match the spatial resolution of Sentinel. So it corresponds for the entire country of about 450 million pixels. And if we took the time dimension, we have more than 100 billion observations that can be converted in different variables. So it's about 3 to 4 terabytes of data. And the cost saving, if you do remember well that Landsat before 2008, we had to pay to access the data. So it corresponds to more or less 6.5 million Swiss francs. So it's more or less dollars as well. So regarding snow cover, so what we did at the beginning of this year, we developed an algorithm called snow observation from space. And we used a specific atmospheric correction model called 6S, that is in the ArcSci software package. And within the pre-processing phase, then you generate a lot of masks, and one of them is the snow extent. So what we've done with the cube, with the data cube in Switzerland, we analyzed 22 years of Landsat data across the entire country, and we come up with this map showing the differences in snow cover extent during the winter season for the last 20 years. So, and what we've seen is a decrease of snow cover of about 4% over the entire country, and an increase of the lowland conditions over the entire country, about 8%. And you can see that, for example, in the Jura Mountain in the Western Alps, we've seen a decrease of up to 25% of snow in the last 20 years. So it's a huge impact. So coming back to Ecopotential, so the ground, we were lucky because within the Swiss Data Cube, we are covering not only Switzerland, but we have also Liechtenstein. So we have also a Liechtenstein Data Cube, so a third country. And we are covering part of France, Germany, Austria, and Italy, and the Gran Paradiso region is in the Aosta Valley, so it's fully covered by the Swiss Data Cube. So we did the same exercise as we did in Switzerland, and this is the map, the snow cover classified by percent of detection over the national park for the decade between 1995 to up to 2005. So in dark blue, it's still winter season. In dark blue, it's between 80% to 100% of the time covered by snow, and the other extreme, it's between zero up to 20%. And if we compare with the next decade, so between 2005 and 2017, you can see that the red class is increasing. So basically, it's probably linked with the elevation-dependent warming variable. So it's going up in the valleys, and we see a similar pattern in Switzerland. And the dark blue class is a little bit shrinking over the national park. So this is the difference between the two maps, and you can see where the regions you see a loss of snow and a small gain of snow. So this is also a way to compare the two periods. So a small decrease in terms of permanent snow. So this is also another view, and a slight increase in terms of lowland conditions. So that's for instance the first result we have for snow cover mapping, and we've done, as you are aware, in Europe we have a huge drought over the entire summer. So it's probably one of the worst drought that we have for the last 40 years. So what we've done, we've developed also for Switzerland an NDVI anomaly algorithm, and we use it over the Gran Paradiso National Park. So it's the columns, it's the months. So starting from the left in June up to so June, July, September, October. And then the lines are the years, so 2015, 2016, up to this year. And if we compare the results, so the baseline is the year 2015, you can see clearly the impact of the drought, and especially in the month August this year, the impact of the drought over the national park. So that's also a first result. So we need further analysis and explanation on those graphs. So the first interpretation in terms of results. So for the snow cover, so we see a different pattern between the Southern Alps and the Northern Alps. So compared to Switzerland, we see in the Northern Alps an increased loss of snow. So that's interesting, and we need further analysis. In terms of NDVI, we need to analyze the spatial distribution and compare it with temperature, precipitation, and vegetation response. And then the next step will be also to link with the in-situ data so that we can validate the results. And in terms of perspective, so one of the benefits is obviously the use of multi-sensor. We use in the same computing environment both Landsat and Sentinel-2 data. We are planning to ingest soon, by the end of November, all the Sentinel-1 data covering Switzerland. So we'll have also radar imagery, so really useful for snow cover mapping and especially to identify snow melt area. We'll also do the same exercise with the French National Park, La Vanoise National Park, that is on the other side of the Gran Paradiso National Park. And well, the first result confirmed this kind of elevation-dependent warming variables. And then we'll continue the work, and this is clearly also, and we hope this can be a contribution to GEO ECO, to GeoGnome, and other GEO initiative. And I will finish just my presentation saying that we have launched in beginning of September call for special issue on Earth Observation Data Cube that is led by myself, Brian Kilo from NASA, Stuart Machin from Geoscience Australia, and Gilberto Camara, the new GEO director. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gregory. Thank you, Gregory. As we are late, actually, I will skip my presentation and give the floor to Douglas because they want the room free. Actually, what I wanted to say in my presentation was just to open a roadmap for discussing the future of Ecopotential and what happens afterwards. But if we have time for a question later, I can come back. But I prefer to listen to Douglas.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a presentation to show, but I was asked to talk about what other contributions, I guess, Ecopotential and GEO ECO can make to SDG 15. In the few minutes that we have, I guess we are over time, I'll just say that you probably are aware of the new initiative on land degradation neutrality. Or maybe you're not aware of it. So there is a new initiative, land degradation neutrality, that is looking at specifically SDG 15.1, and there are three sub-indicators that are being considered. First of all, the change in land cover. Secondly, productivity, and third, soil carbon, changes in soil carbon. So I'm not, you know, I've came in late, but I've followed a bit what Ecopotential is doing, and I guess I see the greatest connections, the greatest contribution happening in change of land cover. I don't know what's happening in terms of productivity, if you're actually looking at that as well. If you are, then those two indicators, but probably not soil carbon, if I'm correct. Are you looking at soil carbon, the amount of yeah, okay. So, okay.
We can talk later.
Okay, good. So the rationale behind the Land Degradation Neutrality Initiative is that the United Nations Convention for Combating Desertification, UNCCD, has come to GEO and asked for help in ascertaining the progress against the SDG 15.1 in particular. So I think that in a very short nutshell is where the greatest contributions could happen. There's I'm also the person at the Secretariat who is supporting the Land Degradation Neutrality Initiative, and I'll be glad to try and help you make inroads with the work that they're doing. So that's all. Thanks.
Just a quick question, answer about carbon. As you know, Ecopotential is working on a set of protected areas, and each of them has their own challenges and monitoring measures. Some of them are equipped with ecovariance towers, and they do the budget of carbon. We ourselves, myself, I'm measuring carbon exchanges with an in situ monitoring device in Gran Paradiso National Park for monitoring if grasslands are sinks or sources of carbon during the summer seasons. And we are going to install an ecovariance tower next summer in Gran Paradiso National Park. Others are monitoring carbon exchange from a proxy with remote sensing. So the next step would be to merge the in situ measures with remote sensing for assessing carbon stores in our protected areas. And this is the work that we want to develop further. If these answers answer your question.
Yeah, that's very good.
Okay. Michael went. No, Michael is not here anymore. So maybe there is time for a conclusion. Alma, do you want to conclude?
First of all, I would like to know if you have some questions or issue related to previous presentations before concluding. Personally, I would like to ask to Roger how to integrate different taxonomies and different products related to global coverage, as well as how can we validate such products at a global level.
Yeah, we saw an interesting presentation, or we heard one from Antonio, and that was all about the elements of vegetation and land cover and land use, and how they could be assembled, disassembled, recombined, and so that one got me thinking about That's interesting because all the global ecosystem mapping that we are doing is also sort of built up from elements. And we currently do not, we build them up and we combine them and we map them out and we say, this is what it is for this time period. And so we don't currently have a modular approach, which would allow you to take out landforms and put in solar radiation, for example, if you want to. Just because it's such a massive effort to map the whole planet at such a fine spatial resolution. But the presentations have got me thinking that not only should we just put the data out, but we should put it out in ways that people can actually take bits and pieces of it out and recombine them in some other way. So that's the modularity part of the question. But the updating, which Sylvia was also interested in, and I should have mentioned this in my presentation, everything that we're doing is still, unfortunately, back in sort of the baselining stage. I mean, people want change. They're tired of base maps. They say, I need to see the change. What change from T0 to T1? And so we come along and present this set of standardized, high-resolution, objective maps of the Earth for different kinds of ecosystems. And they really represent a baseline. And do we have plans going forward for how to see how those ecosystem distributions are changing? Not formally, but what we know is that while we are modeling these ecosystems up using data, the value that I see in Earth observation and remotely sensed imagery is if we know what's changing on the ground just by spectral analysis, and we can absolutely apply those change maps to our baseline ecosystem distribution maps, and we'll be able to tell you right away what changed. And so we have a vision for how these ecosystem distribution maps can be updated in the future. We don't currently have formal plans or agreements with organizations to do that over, say, a 5-year time interval, but everything is open. But mainly what we're trying to do is put these maps out as baseline maps as sort of best available time, best available data for the time period that they cover.
Thank you very much. We could integrate this map within the GeoDesm system to detect the changes. Sylvia, would you like to add something?
If there are other questions, otherwise we need to close. What I wanted to say, that is summarizing what was my presentation, is that as you have seen now you've seen just a very few examples, significant but very few examples of the products in Ecopotential, going from data, models, and maps. Ecopotential is a very large project, and usually when we have our annual meetings, 3 days of discussions are not enough for presenting the results. But we have an amount of data that are stored in a repository. We have the models in the visual laboratory. We have a community that we have built in these years. And what comes next is that we wanted to leave this legacy to other organizations like research infrastructures like EarthCare or LifeWatch in Europe and other international organizations. This is what I wanted to show in one of the next slides. Let me see, how can I go further here? And this is this one. And I will come to you this last year to ask to each of them, what do you want by Ecopotential? What is the legacy that you want to take? Because in this last year of the project, we want to deliver this legacy to the other organization that will take over. That's it. Okay, thank you.